Hi, my name is Jordan Milner, and this is my video for Chapter 12 over diversity and equity today. First, I'd like to discuss some of Wilson's views and how some of his ideas are related to education today, and then I'd like to discuss some of Kozol's views and how those views are related to education today and some of the ideas that they've had that I believe are still relevant to today. So first, in Wilson's interview, he brings up a really good point that I had never thought about, which is that the civil rights movement did legally eliminate racial barriers. However, as Wilson stated, there is not a law that can eliminate the racial inequality that was created by years of racial barriers and discrimination. He states that people develop resources because of the advantages associated with family background and the resources that the parents passed on to the children, financial means, family stability, and peer groups, and so on. Because of years of racial barriers and discrimination, African American families did not have access to such resources, and many families, especially those in the inner cities, are still trying to build those resources today. So that's one way that some students are already disadvantaged. Then he also brings up that the recent changes in the economy and technology have significantly hurt lower-class African American families. He discusses how many of the jobs being held by African American men were industrial jobs, and with technology changing, there is not as much need for this type of labor, and therefore the already disadvantaged factory workers become even more disadvantaged. And also, with our economy today not being as strong as it once was, we know that there's many job losses out there, especially in factories, and so that's another way that it's hurt that population. Finally, in his interview, Wilson suggests that employers do not want to hire inner-city African Americans. Wilson argues that they believe that the environment they live in is so devastating that it affects their work readiness skills, and because of this, they are unable to perform tasks of the job or work with the consumer. Wilson's interview brings to light many problems that African Americans across the United States struggle with. The monetary struggles and stigmas that adult African Americans face, especially in the inner cities, make it very difficult to build a solid monetary foundation for their families. Consequently, African American children are not well prepared for school and can easily fall behind. Children need a stable home with food and water, the ability to receive medical attention if necessary, and adult role models. Due to the racial inequalities, African American families are not always able to provide this for their children. It doesn't mean that they're not trying, it just means that they have so many struggles that they can't always provide everything that their children need. Then when I was reading through his article, When Work Disappears, one major concern he discussed is that the American public school system does not have a unified preschool system. He quotes Ray Marshall in saying that many of our children therefore start school far behind their more advantaged counterparts and subsequently receive inadequate learning opportunities at home as well as in school. As educators, we know that children who come from middle and upper class homes tend to have a more extensive vocabulary starting kindergarten than children who come from low income and poverty families. This, coupled with the fact that our disadvantaged families cannot always afford preschool, contributes to our disadvantaged children being unable to perform as highly as the middle and upper class peers. Now, when Wilson wrote this article, it was back in 1997. Since then, there's been many programs established to help children and families who need that help with financial stability, but there's still many children in the United States who are not receiving preschool and then are starting way behind their classmates when it comes to kindergarten. And so kindergarten teachers are seeing so many different levels of what children know already coming into kindergarten, which already sets just a huge difference in ability in the classroom. So you have some kids who are way advanced and some kids who are way behind, and that makes it very difficult for children already just in kindergarten. Now I'd like to look at Kozol and some of the points he makes in his interview. He was interviewed about his book, Savage Inequalities, and he discusses the city of East St. Louis. He talks of the absolutely horrendous shape of the city homes, and the schools in the town. But what stood out the most to me was his opinions about the teachers and administrators in the town. He describes them as being wonderful, excellent, and impressive. Then he notes that he met courageous administrators struggling against formidable odds and then finding themselves condemned by vicious politicians in Washington for failing to promote excellence. He identifies the struggle that most inner-city schools face, which is that the inability to change the home lives of their students and the lack of funding due to district to the district enforcing low property taxes because the district's families are living in poverty, how can we expect our students to be outperforming their counterparts who live in wealthier districts and have more stable home lives? I think a lot of times one of the first things that people do when education is, I guess, quote unquote, failing is blame the teachers and administrators. And yes, are we a huge part in education? And are there times that I believe we've failed kids? Yes. But I also think people need to realize how much a child's home life can affect their learning at school. And so I thought it was very honorable that he described teachers and administrators as being truly amazing in districts that were failing. And so he's noting really how much poverty can honestly affect students. Also in his interview, Kozol, like Wilson, discusses the need to provide Head Start or preschool for all children. Preschool for every child would help to close the gap between the abilities and incoming kindergartners. Another suggestion that Kozol makes is that each district should share the same per pupil cost for educating a student. He feels that in order to improve education, we must level the playing field and close the gap between our advantaged and disadvantaged students. I can understand the need for providing more funding to our low-income school districts. However, I don't feel that it would be possible to have a nationwide set per pupil cost. I really don't feel that America's wealthier families would agree to this. I think that wealthier school districts, those families would continue to pour money in and would not feel that it was okay to disadvantage their own children, I guess. I completely agree with Kozol and Wilson that we aren't doing enough for our disadvantaged youth. However, I also wonder how much educators and schools can really improve the lives of our underprivileged students. I believe that educators work extremely hard to improve the lives of our students while at school, but that is the problem. We cannot control their lives outside of school. In our school district, we do provide some services for our students that live in poverty. Some of our students may qualify for school-based wraparound, which gives them access to a variety of resources to help them at home. We also have families that receive weekly take-home bags with food and other supplies. Another thing that nationwide we do for our disadvantaged youth is to provide free and reduced lunches for students. However, like I said, it's just really difficult because their home life does affect them so much, but as educators, we can truly only really serve them at school, and so that's just one thing that I don't know that we can necessarily change, which is really difficult. I wish that we could. One suggestion that Kozol and Wilson make is that nationwide all children should have access to either a Head Start or preschool. I believe this would help our disadvantaged children immensely. There is an evident gap in knowledge between our advantaged and disadvantaged youth upon entering kindergarten. If all students received the same preschool education, kindergarten classrooms would flourish, and this would then trickle through all grade levels. However, I am unsure as to how funding would work for this program, as right now elementary and secondary schools are already facing intense budget cuts. The last thing I'd like to talk about is how the election of Obama has changed diversity and equity in our nation. I believe that the election of Obama has in some ways impacted the diversity and equity of America. The election of President Obama has truly revealed how far our country has come in the last century. However, I feel that nationwide there are still racial inequalities. There are still many instances in which people in our society have clearly drawn black versus white lines. The recent riots over police shootings revealed that our country is still divided at times. Conversely, racial minority groups are not the only people who suffer from inequalities. As Kozol and Wilson both mentioned, our low-income families suffer from daily inequalities also. Women in our country and around the world still suffer from inequalities. Government and educational leaders need to continue to find ways to support the education of all students. We need to continue to create programs that help support our disadvantaged students, and we need to be aware of the challenges that they face. We need to be unrelenting in our pursuit to prepare every child for success beyond their high school education. Thanks for listening.